Welcome back to this session on Treasury across the globe, where we bring together chairs of Treasury associations from around the world and link up with the regional series of pre-recorded sessions discussing Treasury and its different challenges and experiences internationally. So I hope you've had a chance to look at some of those. Along with the learnings from the past 4 days, this discussion will take a global view, looking at how treasurers are accelerating strategic change via increased agility and enhanced influence to improve opportunities for the future. So I have with me today Yinka from the ACT Nigeria, Tom from the US Association NACT, and Gogo coming from Hong Kong to us for representing the IACCT. Now, the bios of my three guests are available in the session notes, but I'd like to ask each of them to introduce themselves briefly in their own words and tell me what it is that they love about Treasury. So let's go in alphabetical order, and perhaps I could start with you, Gogo.
Thank you, Caroline. I am Gogo Ko from Hong Kong, China, the president of the International Association of CFOs and Corporate Treasurers, China. It is my great pleasure to have the opportunities to join this ACT flagship events and this interesting session too. I personally have been working with a Chinese state-owned enterprise for about 20 years, witnessing the advanced development and the diversification of Chinese conglomerates or Chinese enterprises here in mainland China and Hong Kong over the past decades. Talking about the Treasury, I personally is very interesting in Treasury and even love Treasury. It is fascinating. We have to keep up with the times, and we have to be alert of the external environment and at the same time, the internal development of the business internally. So anyway, keeping ourselves very good lifelong learning and progressing. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you, and I can sense the passion there. Thank you very much. I'll move over to Tom now, if I may.
Well, thank you, Caroline. Yes, I have been in corporate treasury for longer than I care to remember at this point, but it's been a very interesting run for these many years. And I think I've especially enjoyed all the interconnectedness. You know, there are many positions in companies where the function is more to deal with other employees and it's more inward facing. But I think the tremendous advantage of the corporate treasury is that it's by its nature at least partly outside facing. In fact, it forms a bridge between the company and the outside providers of capital and financial services. And so as treasurer, you get to try to understand the company and then portray its needs to those who can help with either a service or to help finance the strategic moves of the company. So that's been especially valuable. I think a very good exercise, and that's I think the one thing that I like the best. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Tom. And it's true that kind of that external and forwards-looking focus is really quite the exciting part of Treasury, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, thank you again. And let's move on to Yinka now. What is it that you love? A brief introduction and what you love about Treasury.
Thanks, Caroline. I've been a treasurer for about 17 years. Thinking about it now makes me think that I've been here forever. And you know, when I started off as a treasurer, I wasn't very sure whether it was the right fit for me. I was thinking, okay, maybe treasury is for more account-based professionals and all that. But then I found out that it was just more than the historical nature of accounting. It was, like Tom said, forward-looking. It was fun, actually. It was really fun. You know, the nature of cash management, risk management, strategic planning. And then I discovered that over the years, the management and the organization, which I represent, which is CFAO, started to rely more on treasurers. Yeah, and it wasn't the case when we started off almost 2 decades ago. But now within the organization, I'm seen as a critical resource in decision making, and I think that is the evolution that I've seen in the treasury space. For me, I've been opportune to work on treasury projects across Africa, mainly Anglophone Africa, about 8 countries in Africa, and I've had incredible relationships with banks, with different corporate cultures over a long period. So it's been a fantastic journey for me, and treasury is not just work for me, it's passion. It's something I love.
Well, thank you, Yinka. I think, the word fun, I hear that a lot in treasury. I think the outside will probably be a bit puzzled by that, but I think we think it's fun, and that variety, I think, is key, because it's so enjoyable to have that in your day-to-day work, that huge amount of variety we do experience. And just before, I'll stay with you, Yinka, for my first question, but just before I do, I'd just like to remind the audience that there's a Q&A panel to the right of your screen. You can put your questions in there, which we'll hopefully get to through this session. And if you like a particular question, you can do a like sign, and then we can see what are the most popular questions as we go through. Don't forget also to put things out on social media. You've got we're out there at ACT Update, and there's hashtag ACTACT 2021. So please do. It's at the bottom there, I think, somewhere on your screen. Oh, yes, there it is, ACTACT 21. I thought I said it wrong, ACTACT 21. So do please get messages out there, and do get your questions coming in as we progress. But same with you, Yinka, as I said, can I ask you, how has Treasury been affected in your country, region, through the pandemic?
Wow. I would say that, for us, it's been a roller coaster ride. It's been a very difficult ride. And not because we are not faced with the traditional challenges that comes with the pandemic, but because within the region, we face additional challenges. There were issues of liquidity, FX liquidity challenges. If you ask every corporate treasurer from Nigeria or from the Anglophone countries, the number one issue they will tell you about what came after the pandemic was issues of scarcity of FX. Because what happened was that a lot of all the correspondent banks started withdrawing their lines, their clean lines, to local banks. And so those local banks could not offer lines for LCs and all that. So it became incredibly difficult for companies to do their inventory, to order, to open LCs. So it was particularly challenging. And the reason was because there was this issue of scarcity of FX. So we had to deal with that. We also had to deal with regulatory challenges. So the regulator, in our own case, the Central Bank of Nigeria, was trying desperately to manage the situation so that the currency doesn't devalue out of reach. So in doing that, they introduced a lot of regulatory changes. So for treasurers, it was incredibly challenging to try to keep in touch with most of those regulatory changes. In fact, in some of these changes, it became impossible to even open what we call in Nigeria a Form M, which is basically a form that allows you to import, because the regulator, in trying to control demand, put some barriers in place. So when you add that to the challenge of having to then deal with how do you manage your cash flow, in a pandemic world, where you have to now go online, everything now went online. It was an incredibly challenging time, but I think we were able to brave the situation and somehow learn through that experience and how to keep our organizations open.
It's certainly a learning experience, and as you say, Yinka, I think many of our treasurers won't have experienced what you've been experiencing, because it does vary so much depending on where you are in the world. So yeah, really challenging times, but it's good to hear that your treasury community have faced up to the challenges and dealt with them accordingly. I'll just move on to Tom now and hear a little bit in the US. How has Treasury been affected, would you say, over the last 15 to 18 months?
Well, Caroline, it's been very interesting evolution. I mean, when we had initial scares several years ago with SARS-1 and MERS and other incidents, especially for US-based multinational companies, which is my background, we had to implement in certain instances these contingency plans and we've always had at the corporate headquarters a disaster recovery plan. But usually I have to tell you, when that was pulled out, the first thing you had to do was blow the dust off off that book, because it was one of the things that was looked at maybe once a year and updated, but it really wasn't part of what we worried about. And I can tell you that in 2020, when this began, we really not only had to do a one-day test, which had been maybe the prior exercise, but we had to work from home in many cases for these past 15, 16 months and more. And so that, especially for Treasury, has been a challenge in that we have probably lagged other departments in our ability to work from home because of the need for security and moving large amounts of money and needing to do that. And according to most companies' IT departments, from within the company firewall, within the company's offices, and down through the big pipe that the IT people had arranged into the net. And so here there's a new potential vulnerability in that the IT people are unsure just what the security of people's home internet systems would be, the routers that they have to connect to the outside world. And indeed, in many cases, just because of everybody else having to do this, there were delays and slowdowns. I know you've seen that in London, Caroline. And so these were challenges that we rapidly overcame, I think, in all cases successfully. So there's that technical level. And then I think probably the bigger challenge was the interpersonal level. I mean, I myself have always tried to be somebody who doesn't sit behind my desk all day, but walk around, talk to other people in not only my department, but other departments, and see how things are going. And in doing that, you get a much better feel for what kind of stresses the person may be under, how they're doing, and what you as a manager can do to help alleviate that. And so here we had much more of a challenge in that we lost that personal connection through having to work from home in many cases. And so, and the last thing that some people, team members may want to do after having spent all day on their computer, sending emails, interacting with their banks, is to spend time on their computer yet again to talk to the treasurer. And so everybody, I think, has developed ways to try to cut through that and to maintain the personal contacts that are so much required for us to really do our function. And then just to jump back to when this thing started in March of 2020 for many of us, there were some real financing stresses, as Yinka described in Nigeria. I mean, large U.S. companies funding their day-to-day needs through the U.S. commercial paper market were in many cases shut out or had to roll their maturities nightly because the investors would not buy their paper for longer than one day, not knowing what was happening. And so those were some great stresses. And then, as Yinka mentioned, revolving credit lines became an issue. Many U.S. companies have committed credit lines on which they pay a commitment fee, and yet every single credit agreement with banks has a provision called the material adverse change clause that says, well, if despite everything that's happened, there's been a material adverse change in your business, then we don't have to advance the funds that we've committed to you. And so there became kind of a real void and uncertainty where some companies thought that they might have their banks declare that against them and they would no longer be able to access funding for their business. And so they preemptorily drew the funds down. And yet they, more than they needed, they drew down in some cases the entire amounts that were committed to them. And so that became a challenge. And one of the quid pro quos was that they would at least reinvest the excess cash that they didn't need to run their business back with the same banks from whom they had drawn the funds under their committed revolving credit agreements. So this became the juggling act that we've been managing for this past year and more, and it's been very interesting and quite a challenge. But I'd like to say that everybody that we know, Caroline, has come through this successfully. So kudos to them.
Indeed, absolutely, Tom. Thanks for all that. And just reflecting about what you started out with your comments on business continuity plans and so on. I recall when I worked for Unilever, I was responsible for business continuity when I worked for Unilever Thailand. I was invited to create a pilot that they would then roll out across Asia. And the biggest nightmare always was the thought of pandemic, because it is the thing that hits absolutely everything. So whilst with other kinds of crises, they often tend to be somehow finite, I don't know if it's the right word, whereas the pandemic is really infinite. It's everything is affected and everything's interconnected. So you can't actually plan, particularly because you don't know how it's exactly going to affect all of the, and if you were to map out everything that was going to happen to all of your suppliers, all of your customers, particularly if you're a large multinational, you spend all your time doing that. So it's always weighing up the cost against the benefits, shall we say, and looking at the level of risk. But I think what it has taught us is that we even, how should I say, thinking on our feet, people have been able to do amazing things very, very quickly, which is to their credit. But I'll move over to Gogo now to give you a chance to reflect on your region and in particular China and Hong Kong.
Yes, thanks, Caroline. I was trying to recall what has been happening during this pandemic time. I do remember that at that time, most of the corporates and the corporate treasurers are very excited about cash. Cash is the king. It's very important for all the companies. And we do a lot of cash management exercise, liquidity management, and we try to maintain very good relationship with the banks to make sure that the banks understand our problem with the liquidity and cash problem. I do remember that we do a lot of scenarios on the cash flow analysis. We do a lot of them. Many scenarios are prepared because we are not sure about the future. We're not so sure about what's the exact effect on our businesses. So we try to go and discuss with the business sectors, business departments, and see and talk to them and ask them how will they affect the accounts receivables, accounts payables, etc. So it's a quite an exciting job, and people are looking very serious. Actually, this is a good exercise where corporate treasurers are more involved or having more discussions with the management people and the business people on the business operations and how the market will affect the cash flow, etc. And that's setting up a good relationship or try to develop the discussion channels between the management and the corporate treasurers. I think it's quite a good trial. And also I noticed that we try to do a lot of cash pooling, make sure that we got funds available. We discuss with the banks about the facilities. etc. So it's a very busy time for corporate treasurers at that time. But I would also want to point out that there is one scenario that I noticed. Whenever there is any crisis or any events or issues coming out, corporate treasurers are always the first persons that the CFOs are going to ask questions or to ask their comments. They will be asking corporate treasurers what's going on, how's the financial effect on the company, what's the general direction of the markets, etc. So keeping the corporate treasurers really busy, and the corporate treasurer really have to pay attention all the external environments and the effect of the internal of development, of business development, etc. But anyway, my final conclusion I want to mention is that the role of a corporate treasurer is more and more important. It is have an enhanced role, and it can notice that there are a bigger share or bigger, they're taking a more senior or and how to say, enhanced role in a larger seat at the table. And the Treasury has increasing, or how to say, is greater influence in business. So CFOs have more reliance on the corporate treasury functions as a whole, or is increasing their expectation on the corporate treasury functions.
Well, that's a really nice segue into a couple of questions that I wanted to ask around that area. So we carry out business of treasury, we call it research, every year. And we speak to about 200 treasurers around the globe and find out what they're thinking and feeling. And this year's research has just been published, and there is an on-demand session that you can go and look at if you haven't seen that yet. There were a couple of interesting things that came out this year. One particularly related clearly to the pandemic and its impact, because what we found was that treasurers were actually spending less time on strategic matters and more on operational. However, they were viewed as even more strategic by their colleagues and board. So I think that, the pandemic, it made it inevitable that they had to spend a lot of time on operational matters. However, having said that, still they were seen as more strategic than previously. And the other really interesting thing that came out when we asked our treasurers, what are the barriers to career progression? Again, the same as last year, the greatest barrier to someone's career progression is a lack of leadership and strategic influencing skills. And that is stronger the higher up in your career that you go. So staying with you, Gogo, I'd just like to ask, how do you see the skill sets and responsibilities of treasurers changing going forwards? And does it include something happening with these, as I say, strategic influencing and leadership skills that we're talking about?
Yeah, I think the first comment is corporate treasurer. The role of corporate treasurers is constantly evolving. Corporate treasurers must keep up with the times. If not, they will be lag behind. They are more involved. Corporate treasurers are more involved with all. Nearly, I can say, corporate treasurers is like Superman. They have to know everything. They have to know. Basically, they have to understand their figures. They must have quality data on hand to support what they are saying to the management. And they have to make sure that they have a very good treasury management system to ensure that they can have the efficiency to have timely quality data at their fingertips. But at the same time, they have to learn to be more to learn the communication skills and the leadership skills to make sure that they can present their data or present their viewpoints to the management and to the other business departments in a better way, in a more presentable way and acceptable way. So they need to have very good communication skills and leadership skill etc. But the problem is they have to face a lot of how to say, they have to keep up with the changing environment, the digital transformation environment. They have to make sure that their corporate treasury functions maintained, or to ensure that the level of their functions have to be as efficient as possible, so that they can have the energy or have the efforts or the time to allocate more time on the strategic planning, etc. So it's really a kind of superheroes. You have to be I don't know whether all the other speakers will agree with me. They have to make sure that internally, they have to make sure the treasury management system is as efficient as possible. At the same time, they need to have the skills to communicate, to have the leadership skill, communication skills to talk with the business people. And at the same time, they have to understand what's going on outside the environment. So that's explain why they may not be able to be spending a lot of time on strategy, but they still seem to be working on the strategic, is working more on the strategic side of the business.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, if you look back, say maybe the 19th century, people often were very good at lots of different things, and they had a broad knowledge, shall we say, because they weren't going maybe as into depth in some things. And then I think over time and into the next century, we got very specialist, and we got more and more specialist. And then now we're having to be specialists, but in loads more stuff, so it just gets broader and broader, which is fascinating. And another point, just before I move on to Yinka for his thoughts, is we yesterday at the NACT conference, we had a great keynote from Liz Nutter, who is a retired lieutenant colonel from the US Army, and she's also a master neurocoach. And she was showing us a system that the US used to look at different leadership traits. So do go on there and you can work out whether you're a green, blue, orange or gold, and have a think about that, because it's really interesting how, looking not only at your own leadership style and skills, but how other people are around you and how you interact with them. But I'd like to move on, and I see some questions coming in, and we'll come to those in just a moment. But Yinka, what are your thoughts about that same question, about what will be the skill set and responsibilities of the future for treasurers?
Thanks, Caroline. Gogo made a good point where she said that today's treasurer is seen a lot from the operational part of it, but also from the strategic part of it. Now, what you find is that organizations now, knowing the strategic role of the treasurer, because like Gogo said, everything now, they want to call the treasurer. They want to know, okay, what are your thoughts about the market? What are your thoughts about the FX? I mean, I get questions like, oh, Yinka, what's the exchange rate of the naira to the dollar in the next 1 year? And I say, if I know the answer to that question, I probably shouldn't be on this job. I probably should be gaming somewhere, because you don't know the answer. But management is depending on you for that. So they want it both ways. They want your strategic input, but they also want you to be involved in operational stuff. And I mean, really operational stuff. And that conflicts, because for you as a treasurer, you know that your capacity and your skill set is more when you look at the bigger picture, not on the narrow, picture, because you get to spend more time on that operational part, and you spend less time on where your skill set really is. Now, today's treasurer has to be an accountant, has to be a supply chain expert, has to be a financial markets expert, has to be an IT expert. And in my country also, you have to be a bureau de change expert. So, so it's a lot to combine, and a lot of expectation. So I think, like Gogo said, there's a lot of evolution going on, and I think that at some point it's going to become clearer what are those, particular skill set that makes for a better treasurer, or one that is able to, be more effective at their work. I think ultimately treasurers are going to need to have more data analytical skills, in terms of in terms of IT, and at the same time they also have to be able to understand the financial markets very well. In Nigeria, for instance, there's been a lot of development in the financial market sector, and now many years ago you couldn't get a forward that was more than 90 days. You couldn't get a forward that was more than 90 days. But now you can get forwards of up to 5 years. So that's a lot. That's a lot of movement. Okay. Many years ago, there was no derivative exchange in Nigeria. Now, there's a derivative exchange. The Security Exchange Commission is, introducing new rules about derivative markets and products. The capital market is very, very alive. So you know that as a treasurer, you cannot just be doing, cash management and all that. At some point, you're going to have to develop the skills of how to manage the financial market.
Absolutely. So challenges all around, but as we said at the outset, fun at the same time, hopefully. And I know one of the questions here is around any advice for those aspiring for a career in Treasury. Just while we're still with you, Inka, would you like to just take that as well? Because as you maybe see on the screen, this person said they've enjoyed the Treasury roles, as you mentioned. But what advice would you give to someone who might be thinking of stepping into Treasury or wanting a full career in it? Any thoughts there, Inka, before we move on to Tom?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, let me just give a little bit about my background. So I came from I studied economics. I came from what you call the business management or business finance environment, and later on I went into IT. So I branched into IT. Learned some basic things around data management and software management, and I did some projects. And so when I got into Treasury, I found out that the unique skills that I had in management and also in IT was very, very important. So I had the finance, I had basic finance knowledge, I had IT knowledge, and I also had management knowledge. So if you're building up a career in Treasury, you need to have a bit of both. One of the things you can go look at is just look at the CV and the career of Caroline. It gives you an idea where she's been over many years and how she's built up that career in understanding how business functions. So take it at the back of your mind that you need skills in management, you need skills in IT. It's very, very key. It's very important. And you also need key knowledge in finance. So any way you can do some programs or courses. ACT has a lot of programs, for instance, a lot of courses that you can key into that develop skills and capacity for you to be able to grow. Ultimately, you cannot become a treasurer overnight. It's something that you grow into by solving many problems and dealing with many issues overall. I hope I've been able to give you a good career advice in Treasury.
Thanks very much for that, Inka. You did make me sound very, very old. So I think I'm going to have to make up some kind of story like I started very young, but that's not true either. I think I'll just have to face up to it. But thank you very much for that comprehensive response. Now over to you, Tom. What do you think are the skills and requirements for treasurers of the future? And also, somebody who's aspiring to come into the role, if you could cover off both of those as well from your point of view, if you wouldn't mind.
I'd be happy to. And Caroline, I would like to second your recommendation for people to go over and look at the Liz Nutter session that you helped moderate. And it was a very good discussion. And it as you mentioned, is a way to determine what your leadership and in some ways personality style may be. And I would urge everybody to make that assessment for themselves. And I can tell you that without revealing, what the answer, I'll just say that I was in the majority of treasurers who took their self-assessment just briefly during the live session. And I came out very analytical. And I do believe that that's a skill that's generally applicable and is a very good attribute if you've got it to allow you to make a success in Treasury. I mean, I myself studied physics and mathematics as an undergraduate and then got an MBA in finance from the Wharton School. So very quantitative analytic background, and I tried to apply those skills to business. And one of the things that has happened even during this pandemic, where management would want to get input, results from the accountants, and they determine cash flow kind of backwards from the way we do in Treasury. They draw up the balance sheet at the beginning of the period and at the end of the period and look at changes in between and back into what the cash flow is that is implied by those balance sheet changes. And yet, what do? We ask each of our banks what cash is in the account on a daily basis, because it's a very bad day for a corporate treasurer to bounce a check in the US or to have insufficient funds. And so we're engaged in this process where we can actually tell management on a month-to-date basis, a quarter-to-date basis, well in advance of when the accountants may have it prepared, what the cash flow is of the business. And if we've segregated bank accounts by business segment, we can even give them that extra layer of information. And in many cases, corporate treasurers seeking to satisfy management's request for how are we doing during this pandemic, if they had segments of their business shut down because of requirements, we're able to come in and with this kind of analytic solution, be able to solve those problems. And so that's an application of a general treasury skill and being able to see how it could be used elsewhere that I think is very good. And then the other one that we've talked about, as I said, with treasurers having one foot in the company and one foot in the outside world, in the markets and whatever, especially during this pandemic where there was a need to convey that the company has the strength and the processes in place to make it through. Treasurers are having what's very much a two-way conversation with the banks, with the rating agencies, with all the providers of their capital. And to have that two-way conversation, they're discussing with their business partners within the company what the state of their business is. They're conveying that to those outside people, and they're having that interaction and bringing those conversations back in. So they're really demonstrated their strategic partner, that they're a strategic partner, and they're providing a view of the company that management maybe didn't have access to previously. And so that kind of skill at communication and conveying the big picture, distilling the facts, conveying the big picture, and bringing it back is another set of attributes that are very good for treasurers and prospective treasurers to bring to the department.
Absolutely, and it's you talk about the analytical skills and numeracy and all that. For those of you who saw Professor Kevin Fong speaking the other day and speaking about his experience with NASA and with the NHS England during the COVID pandemic, really interesting. So a guy who is an emergency doctor with the ambulance service, the helicopters that save people's lives and so on here in the UK, but somebody who also was an astrophysicist and also looks at people in extreme situations, which is why he was with NASA. That has held him in good stead, that the astrophysicist bit where he was used to data and he understood how to process it. And then he goes to be medical person, but in the pandemic, they need somebody who understands the data in a way that maybe a medical person wouldn't. And then if you watch him as well, I would say his communication skills, he's absolutely charming. He's got such a lovely way about him. And then you think, actually, for any role where you want to be an influencer, you've got to have those technical skills underpinning, whichever they happen to be, and numeracy is really good to have that amongst other skills, but then you've got to be able to communicate it as well. And then it comes back to, as we said, the Liz Nutter session, or Liz Nutter, I should say, because that's how her name's pronounced. And some of you may be wondering where you can see that. Well, what we're doing is we're transferring, or we're not transferring, we're copying the NACT sessions that have now been recorded onto the ACT platform. So even if you don't have access to the NACT part, it's happening as we speak. So either now or shortly, you should be able to see a whole range of new sessions with great content that you can tap into, including that session with Liz Nutter. So we are getting low on the time frame because there's just so much to talk about with my great panelists. And I wonder if I could ask maybe one of you to answer this next question, just so we can fit a couple more in before the end. And this question is, has the pandemic advanced Treasury tech? If an advance is seen, where is it seen? And what's the potential for global Treasury learnings, I assume, in the tech space? Anyone want to give a brief answer to how they see the pandemic advancing technology? Anyone feel passionate about that? Yinka.
All right. I mean, the fact is that one of the things that pandemic has shown is that the treasurer of the future has to lean more on technology. Okay, so the idea is not just to have ERPs that are accounting based, but you must also have, treasury management systems that are technology based. So you must have a place where you collate, you collect, you process, all your data, and then you can also have a plugin for your accounting data, and then use that same platform to do other things like forecasting and also even payment. So I think that a lot of organizations have been slow to connect to the tech part of Treasury. I mean, they understand it, they know the need for it, but they say, okay, we don't have the budget for it. But now what the pandemic has done is that it has made that absolutely important, especially if you're a multinational, because if you're a multinational, you don't want to have to open accounting, online bank accounts or online bank access to all your banks. It makes no sense. All right. So you want to have one platform where you can manage all your treasury and do all your payments and all your forecasts and everything that you need to do. So so the potential for treasury tech is very huge, and we're going to see many more.
Now, I think we're just losing Yinka slightly, but I think we caught the end of that, and we're going to see a lot more. And if you want to see some of the statistics from around the world, do again look at that Business of Treasury research analysis, because it shows what people have been doing and where they're planning on investing. It was fascinating at the outset of the pandemic because people were just trying to get to grips with working from home, etc. But I think it opened up a whole new case for advancing your systems. And you can see a little bit more of that, as I say, in the research. Now, we are running low on time, but I want to ask Gogo, in 30 seconds, do you believe, as we become more global, we're seeing a convergence of approaches and culture, and is this good or bad? So I'll pose that to Gogo.
Very quick. I think it's very good to have interaction between different associations from different nationalities, from different regions of the world. We Hong Kong people, or people from mainland China and Hong Kong, are very interested is very happy to participate and interact with our Treasury peers worldwide. And will be very happy to learn and to learn more best practice and learn from each other. So yeah,
thank you, Gogo. And Tom, I want to ask you my final question about how you see the nature and the role of Treasury associations across the world and the connectedness. with the wider financial and official sector, but I can only give you about 30 to 40 seconds for that. Do you think you can rise to the challenge?
I'll try, Caroline. Well, I think the very nature of what we've been going through this past year and a half has been a global phenomenon. And so, especially for US-based multinational companies, and I would say in almost all respects, every company, even if it doesn't have sales outside the United States, is multinational in its supply chain or in some aspect of its business or other. And so having the connectedness, and the ACT and the NACT are both members of the International Group of Treasury Associations, and we talk to our peers and share information that way. And so, yes, I think that because we're all been dealing, especially with this pandemic, which is a global pandemic, then having these global connections have been very useful to us.
Thank you, Tom. And I'm sorry we've not got time for more. I think we could go on a lot longer. We had lots more questions lined up, but hopefully we've covered a lot, and the audience questions, thank you so much for those as well. So do give feedback on this session. Do put stuff out on social media. Do go into the discussion zone and have chats about some of those key topics that you'll find there. And do get around those stands. There's lots of prizes to be won. There's lots of content to download from the exhibition stands, and there's been a lot of effort put in there to, we have 66 plus 8 stands, so we've got around, yeah, a huge number of stands for you to find out information from, so please do avail yourself of it over the next 30 days. But it just remains for me to say thank you to Yinka, to Tom, to Gogo. Thanks for being here, and thanks for giving us your words of wisdom.
Thank you, Caroline.
Take care.
Thank you, Gojo.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, everybody. Hi, Tom.